Okay, let's just jump right into this. All takeoffs are optional, but every landing is compulsory. It's a pretty famous saying in the full-scale aviation world, right? But honestly, it perfectly captures that knot of anxiety every single RC pilot feels when it's finally time to bring their aircraft back down to Earth. Because, well, what goes up absolutely must come down. So, if you are completely tired of bouncing your lightweight foam trainer down the runway, or, spending your evenings gluing foam back together and constantly repairing a smashed up nose gear, well, you're in the exact right place. It's an incredibly common struggle, but here's the good news. It is 100% avoidable. Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to entirely demystify the physics of landing. We'll break down the exact techniques used by the pros to give you those picture-perfect, buttery smooth touchdowns every single time. And that applies whether you're just starting out on a high-wing trainer or you're flying a heavy, complex scale warbird. All right, here is our flight plan for today. We'll start with number 1, the landing setup and trim. 2, mastering the approach pattern. 3, the throttle and elevator secret. 4, the flare and touchdown. And finally, 5, scaling up to advanced jets. Okay, let's kick things off with Section 1, the landing setup and trim, preparing for descent. You see, a perfect landing doesn't just magically happen at the runway. It actually begins with your setup. If your setup is wrong, you're literally fighting physics from the start. Getting your mechanics right is absolutely crucial. For instance, if your center of gravity, your CG, is too far forward, your plane is going to be super nose-heady. Combine that with flying in a safe mode with limited elevator rates, and you will physically struggle to get the nose up during a landing. You'll just plow right into the dirt. So you really need to ensure your CG is correct and that you actually have enough elevator throw to flare the plane. Another huge concept is trimming for slow flight. A lot of beginners, well, they just chop the throttle to slow down, right? But aerodynamically, planes are literally built to drop their nose and maintain airspeed when you do that. So instead, while you're at a safe altitude, try reducing your throttle just a bit and adding up elevator trim. Do this until the plane flies safely slow with about a 2-degree nose-up attitude. By doing this, you're establishing a safe, slow approach speed without risking a nasty stall. Moving on to Section 2, mastering the approach pattern. Consistency is key. Now that your plane is properly trimmed to fly slowly, we've got to talk about the actual physical pattern you fly to line up with the runway. Consistency here is everything. Seriously, rather than just flying around randomly, you want to fly a consistent pattern. You fly a downwind leg parallel to the runway, make a nice smooth 180-degree base turn, and then line up for final. To do this perfectly, you should really use physical landmarks. Pick a specific tree, a fence, maybe a shed. By turning at those exact landmarks every single time, you completely eliminate the guesswork of where your plane is in 3D space. By flying that consistent pattern, you're aiming to establish what the pros call a stable approach. We're borrowing this concept directly from full-size airlines. It basically means your speed and descent rate are totally constant, you're only making tiny little control inputs, and your wings are level. If your approach isn't stable, well, full-scale airlines mandate that their pilots shoot a missed approach and go around. And you know what? You should adopt that exact same mentality. No shame in a go-around. And as you make that final approach, you really want to keep your airplane within a 30 to 40-degree cone of vision relative to where you're standing. Why? Because if you try to execute a turn or judge your final glide path way down the runway outside of this cone, judging your speed and depth perception is practically impossible. Always bring it right into your visual sweet spot. All right, Section 3, the throttle and elevator secret, the counterintuitive reveal. So once you're properly lined up on final approach, we hit the biggest hurdle. This right here is the single biggest mistake novice RC pilots make, and honestly, it completely defies human instinct. The novice instinct, when you realize you're coming in a bit too high, is to just chop the throttle entirely and point the nose down to rush to the runway. But diving actually increases your airspeed. That forces you to rely on this panicked split-second flare at the very bottom, which almost always ends in a nasty bounce and a smashed nose wheel. Advanced pilots, they prefer a shallow, controlled approach. So instead of diving, you absolutely need to memorize this golden rule from full-scale aviation. Ready? Elevator for speed, throttle for altitude. I know, it sounds incredibly counterintuitive, but you must hold your elevator to manage your pitch and airspeed and use your throttle to smoothly control how fast you descend. If you're dropping too fast, just add a click of throttle. If you're too high, ease back on the throttle. It really is a game changer. Next up,
Section 4, the flare and touchdown, entering the ground effect.
Okay, so you've controlled your descent with the throttle. Now, as your plane gets about a wingspan away from the runway, the aerodynamics dramatically change. You're entering the flare zone, navigating a phenomenon called ground effect. Think of it as a pocket of increased lift and decreased drag right above the runway surface. Ground effect literally makes the plane want to float on a cushion of air. To counter this and actually, land, you must carefully ease back the throttle while gently pulling the elevator stick back to raise the nose. Because the ultimate goal of the flare is this: holding that nose-up attitude allows the main wheels, the rugged rear ones, to kiss the runway first. You're bleeding off all that forward energy on the main gear, safely keeping your super fragile nose gear completely off the ground during that initial impact. The trick is executing these final seconds chronologically. Keep the wings perfectly level on approach. Gently pull the nose up for the flare, let the main gear touch, and then here's the kicker. As the nose naturally drops, you have to keep flying the plane. Don't just let go. Use your rudder to steer it all the way through the rollout until the aircraft comes to a complete, safe stop. Let's move to Section 5, scaling up to advanced jets. High stakes, higher speeds. Now, a lightweight foam trainer has incredibly forgiving wings. It'll often let you get away with a sloppy flare or a slightly steep dive. But graduating to heavy, scale warbirds and jets, that requires absolutely flawless execution of all these fundamentals. The stakes are just so much higher because of one specific, terrifying danger: the tip stall. It is the #1 killer of advanced jets on a landing approach. It happens when you fly too slowly through a banked turn. The plane just suddenly drops a wing, and it feels like a total loss of radio control right in the corners of your pattern. And honestly, by the time you react, it's usually too late. To prevent a tip stall, you have to follow this vital rule: power into your turns when you're flying slow. Remember, banked wings physically alter how lift is generated, massively reducing your margin of safety. So you absolutely must carry a bit of power and speed through those final turns to keep the air flowing cleanly over those wingtips. Advanced planes also bring in a whole bunch of complex dynamics the trainers just don't have. Dropping retractable gear adds massive drag. Deploying flaps completely changes your pitch and lift, and you'll have to anticipate adverse yaw. That's where using the ailerons actually drags the nose in the wrong direction, so you have to use coordinated rudder inputs to keep the plane tracking straight. You've got to manage all of this while still maintaining that shallow throttle-controlled glide slope we talked about. Finally, the perfect landing, putting it all together.
Okay, let's bring this all home. Whether you're flying a simple high-wing trainer or a super complex F-86 Sabre jet, a beautiful landing is never an accident. It's always the result of a deliberate, well-practiced sequence. Actually, one of our sources shared a great story about a 13-year-old kid who flies perfectly. Why? Because he spends whole days doing literally nothing but shooting approaches. So here's my challenge to you. Take a single battery, dedicate it entirely to shooting purposeful, repetitive approaches and touch and goes. Stop just trying to survive your landings and start actively flying the plane all the way to the ground. Once you master this, I promise you, the scariest part of RC flying will easily become your absolute favorite maneuver. The sky is no longer the limit. So, once you master the perfect touchdown, what dream aircraft are you going to conquer next?